In a world obsessed with noise appearances and the desperate need to be seen, we've forgotten where true power lives. It doesn't shout. It doesn't plead for recognition. True power whispers, and in that whisper lies something far more unsettling than any scream control. The kind of control that doesn't need to prove itself because its presence alone shifts the energy in the room. You've felt it before. That chilling calm, that silence that says more than 1,000 words. Look closely at history's most feared rulers, and you'll see one common trait they didn't beg to be feared. They simply were. Not because of how loud they roared, but because of what they withheld. Their silence was strategic, their restraint terrifying. And no man embodied this contrast more than Henry VIII. A king who once commanded armies silenced nobles and bent the church to his will, yet in his final days he didn't go out roaring. He decayed in silence, rotting from within, gripped by fear, betrayal, and the one thing no crown can shield you from the consequences. This is the tragedy of misunderstood power. You can dominate a kingdom, but if you cannot command yourself, you'll crumble from the inside. That's what Machiavelli knew, that the most dangerous man isn't the one who lashes out. It's the one who doesn't need to. Power isn't found in the spotlight. It's forged in stillness, sharpened in the dark, and unleashed with precision. Because when you move in silence, they never see the blade coming. Violence is loud, emotion is messy, but true strategy. It's silent, so silent, that most people never even realize it's happening. While the world reacts in anger, lashes out in fear, and scrambles to be seen, the real player remains still. He watches, he listens, he collects data in the chaos. Because he knows the first to react is the first to lose control. In the face of insult, the fool yells. The weak man fights to prove he's strong, but the dangerous one, he doesn't flinch. He lets silence carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken consequences. That kind of stillness unsettles people because in it, they're forced to confront their own impulsiveness. It's not weakness, it's power under pressure, the kind that doesn't seek validation because it already owns the outcome. Machiavelli warned against the illusion of strength found in explosive emotion. Anyone can be loud, anyone can swing a sword, but only a few can sit in silence while the room burns, calculating, adapting, and smiling as others unravel themselves. Real strength is not in the punch thrown. It's in the hand that holds still. Waiting. This is the game most people never see. The strategist doesn't need to raise his voice. He lets others expose their desperation. He knows that when emotions lead, mistakes follow. So he remains unreadable, not because he has nothing to say, but because what he holds back is more powerful than anything he could say out loud. In a world where reaction is currency, he remains bankrupt and untouchable. There's a common mistake the weak always make. They confuse noise with strength. They believe the louder they are, the more power they project. So they raise their voices, pound their chests, flaunt their ego, and hope the world mistakes it for confidence. But true power doesn't seek attention. It commands it quietly, effortlessly, and often without a single word. The man who boasts, who threatens, who constantly reminds others of his worth, is often the one most afraid of being overlooked. That's not strength, that's insecurity in costume. Machiavelli saw through this illusion centuries ago. He understood that the truly dangerous man is not the one who demands respect, but the one who makes you offer it instinctively, unconsciously. Real danger doesn't announce itself. It watches from the shadows, analyzes every move, and waits until the perfect moment to strike not with rage, but with calculation. The most lethal predators are often the quietest in the room, not because they have nothing to say, but because they know speaking too soon gives away position. And position is power. So when you enter a room, don't watch the loudest one. Watch the one who speaks last or not at all, the one whose silence shifts the atmosphere. That's the presence people fear, not because it's violent, but because it's unreadable. And in a world addicted to visibility, the person you can't read is always more dangerous than the one screaming for attention. Machiavelli never trusted emotions. not because he lacked them, but because he understood how easily they could be turned against you. In his world, the one who reacted first was already defeated, because a reaction means you've surrendered control of your mind, your image, your power. And in any battle, whether political, personal, or psychological, control is everything. You can be brilliant, you can be right, but if you let anger speak for you, you've already handed your opponent the advantage. Why? Because emotion is predictable, and anything predictable can be manipulated. The Stoics knew this too. They taught that a man must master himself before attempting to master others. Machiavelli took it a step further, suggesting that the man who appears calm while others rage holds a weapon they'll never see until it's too late. Stillness isn't passivity, it's preparation. When you're insulted, do you bite back? When you're attacked, do you respond immediately, or do you wait? Let the fire burn itself out, then strike when the smoke clears. The one who remains composed gains something priceless, the ability to choose when to act, how to respond, and whether to destroy or disappear. Because power isn't about dominating through force, it's about positioning. And you cannot position yourself when your emotions are pulling the strings. Control yourself, and you'll control the game. Let them scream. Let them accuse. Let them unravel. While you remain still, watching, calculating, waiting. That's how the real victors win, with silence, not sound. You don't always have to attack your enemies. Sometimes the most devastating blow is the one you never throw because the enemy lands it on themselves. That's the genius of psychological warfare. You don't strike. You create doubt. You don't speak. You let them wonder what your silence means. And in that vacuum, the mind does what it does best. It spirals. The most effective weapon isn't a sword or a threat. It's uncertainty. When you say nothing, they fill in the blanks. They replay their actions. They question their words. They imagine your retaliation, your plan, your counterstrike, even when none exists. That imagination becomes a prison. You didn't have to punish them. They began punishing themselves. Machiavelli understood this principle. Fear, that is self-generated, is far more corrosive than any external threat. A king who whispers nothing is far more terrifying than one who screams decrees, because the whisper leaves room for interpretation, and the interpretation often exaggerates itself. When you deny your enemy's clarity, you deny them control. And when people feel they've lost control, they panic, overreach, and ultimately self-destruct. That's when you move, not because you have to, but because the groundwork is already done. They've already weakened themselves. You don't win the game by playing every piece. You win by watching them knock over their own. Let them fear your silence. Let their imagination do the damage. Because in the art of power, what they think you might do is often more terrifying than what you actually do. The master strategist doesn't charge head-on. He doesn't shout across the battlefield or try to break his opponent with brute force. No, he rearranges the field itself. He manipulates the space, the timing, the conditions. Because the wisest minds know you don't need to change a person. You only need to change their environment, and the rest unfolds on its own. This is the art of environmental manipulation, an invisible hand that shifts the rules of engagement without ever being seen. While your opponent focuses on you, you're quietly moving the walls around them, cutting off their options, limiting their support, changing their resources. And by the time they realize the terrain has changed, it's already too late. Think of it like chess. You don't always need to take their queen. You just block every escape route until their next move is a mistake, or worse, a trap. You haven't destroyed them. You've engineered the collapse around them. Machiavelli knew that people resist direct control. They push back. They rebel. But when you change the conditions subtly, strategically, they begin to act in ways that serve your interests without realizing it. Their choices feel like their own, but the outcomes were always yours. This is the power of shifting the battlefield. Let others scream. Let them play by emotion. You play by design. Because if you control the space, you control the story. And if you control the story, you don't just win, you make them believe they lost on their own. People rarely act on truth. They act on what they think is true. That's why the wisest never waste time trying to be understood. They focus on being perceived the way they choose. Machiavelli said it best: "Men judge more by the eye than by the hand." In other words, your image matters more than your intentions, your reputation more than your reality. Control the optics, and you control the battlefield. In the world of power, perception is reality. It doesn't matter how skilled you are, how noble your motives, or how deep your wisdom runs. If others see you as weak, you're treated as weak. If they see you as calm, unbothered, unshaken, even when you're breaking inside, they hesitate. And that hesitation is the gap you dominate. This is not deception for the sake of ego. It's strategy for the sake of survival. Because in every room, every negotiation, every conflict, you are being judged in seconds. Your tone, your posture, your silence, all of it speaks before your mouth ever opens. So ask yourself, are you being intentional with how you're perceived, or are you leaving it to chance? The Machiavellian doesn't just exist, he performs. He crafts his image like a weapon. He knows how to look strong even when cornered, how to appear flexible while staying rigid, how to be read one way while acting in another. Because control over perception is control over outcome. And when the world sees you the way you want to be seen, you don't need to fight for power, they hand it to you. Ambiguity is a weapon, one of the sharpest in a strategist's arsenal. When you're clear, you become predictable. But when you're vague, unreadable, and silent, people begin to invent their own stories about you. And those stories can be far more powerful and terrifying than anything you could have said yourself. Silence forces the opponent to imagine your motives, your plans, your next move. And in that silence, their mind becomes your battlefield. The fear they create is their own, but you benefit from it. Because when a man is uncertain, he hesitates. And when he hesitates, he's no longer a threat. Machiavelli knew that power doesn't always come from direct action. Sometimes it comes from deliberate restraint. Say less, reveal nothing. Let your stillness speak louder than their shouting. Let them wonder, is he planning something, or has he already struck and I haven't realized it yet? That's the genius of controlled ambiguity. It shifts pressure back to your opponent. Their imagination turns into paranoia. Their overthinking becomes distraction. While they unravel mentally, you remain still calm, focused, unshaken. Don't fear being misunderstood. Weaponize it. In the age of oversharing, the person who reveals nothing becomes the most feared. Because when they can't read you, they can't control you. And when they can't predict you, they no longer feel safe around you. There's a more devastating form of psychological warfare than threats or confrontation. It's the silent mirror. You don't argue. You don't retaliate. You simply reflect. And in that reflection, your opponent sees something far more terrifying than you themselves. Most people are not afraid of others. They're afraid of what they try to hide within. Their guilt, their intentions, their insecurity. When you remain still calm, unreadable, they begin to project. They assume you know. They fear you see through them. You haven't lifted a hand, but you've triggered a war inside their own mind. This is the mirror Machiavelli understood, one that doesn't reflect who you are, but who they believe you to be. It forces them to confront their worst traits: arrogance, fear, betrayal. You didn't say a word. You just held up a silence so clear, so still, that it echoed their own darkness back at them. That's why stillness disturbs people. Because it doesn't give them direction, it gives them reflection. And most enemies crumble not because you exposed them, but because they expose themselves under the pressure of your silence. True power doesn't always strike. Sometimes it simply waits while others destroy themselves trying to interpret what you're not saying. In that quiet, their mind becomes their executioner, and all you did was hold the mirror steady. Silence isn't passive. It's precision warfare. Most people think that the absence of words means the absence of power, but that's a fatal miscalculation. Because when used deliberately, silence becomes the sharpest blade in psychological combat. It cuts not through noise, but through uncertainty. And uncertainty, when stretched over time, becomes unbearable. This is why prolonged silence is one of the most effective tools of pressure ever created. It doesn't confront, it lets them confront themselves. Every second you remain quiet, the mind of your opponent begins to twist. Why isn't he responding? Did I cross a line? What is he planning? They obsess, they spiral, and in that spiral their confidence decays. Machiavelli didn't need to shout. He understood the terrifying weight of not responding. He knew that people fear what they don't understand, and silence is the ultimate unknown. You can argue with noise, but you cannot fight silence. It offers no opening, no target, no relief. To the emotionally impulsive, your stillness feels like abandonment. To the guilty, it feels like judgment. To the paranoid, it feels like punishment. And to all of them, it feels like power. So don't underestimate silence. Wield it like a scalpel. Use it not to avoid conflict, but to dominate it without ever needing to raise your voice. In a world addicted to speed, patience has become a forgotten superpower. Everyone wants to speak first, strike, first win first. But the Machiavellian doesn't rush, he waits, because he knows what the impulsive never. Learn timing isn't just part of power, it is power. The masses confuse urgency with strength, but urgency exposes fear. It exposes a lack of preparation of control. The patient man, on the other hand, commands time like a weapon. He stretches moments, delays decisions, watches chaos unfold, and while others burn out in haste, he sharpens his blade in the dark. Patience isn't weakness. It's a cold, deliberate pause that unsettles your opponent. It signals that you're not driven by reaction, you're operating by design. And when the world expects movement, your stillness becomes unpredictable. Unpredictability breeds fear, and fear leads to mistakes, their mistakes. Machiavelli understood that most wars are lost not because of lack of force, but because of bad timing. The impatient reveal their hand too early. They expose their strategy. But the one who waits, who resists the urge to rush, becomes a ghost in the game, always watching, always calculating, never trapped by a momentum. True patience isn't passive. It's the art of letting others waste energy while you conserve yours until the moment comes when one quiet move ends everything. And by then, it's not a battle. It's a checkmate. Control over time is control over outcome. Not because time itself wins battles, but because he who controls the pace controls the pressure. When you set the rhythm, you dictate the terms of war, not just the fight, but the very conditions under which it's fought. And that's where true power lives, not in strength, not in noise, but in tempo. Machiavelli knew this well. He understood that the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who hits hardest, it's the one who chooses when to strike. When you rush, you hand over your advantage. You move by emotion, not by reason. But when you slow the game down, when you bend time to your will, your opponent starts playing your game, even if they don't realize it. You reschedule meetings. You delay responses. You wait 3 beats longer than expected before replying. Every second you stretch is a subtle message I move when I decide not when you expect. And that disorients people. It frustrates them. That frustration leads to missteps, and those missteps are where your leverage lives. It's not about being passive. It's about turning time into a psychological weapon. While they chase immediacy, you stay in control. While they try to provoke a reaction, you remain unmoved, and in that stillness, the clock ticks in your favor. Because in the game of power, speed is a trap. But timing is the kill shot. In war, energy is currency, and most people spend it recklessly yelling, defending, reacting, trying to prove something. They burn fast, loud, desperate to be seen as strong. But the strategist knows better. He doesn't waste energy on noise. He stores it. He waits. And when he strikes, it's clean, final, irreversible. Your enemy wants you to react. That's how they measure control, by pulling you into their chaos. But when you don't take the bait, when you don't respond to provocation, something strange happens. They start to burn out. Every insult, every threat they throw, it lands in silence. That silence frustrates them, drains them, weakens them. Meanwhile, you remain still, calm, focused. While they're emotionally exhausted, you're sharpening your advantage in the shadows. Every move they make in desperation gives you more information, more leverage. And when the moment finally comes, you don't explode, you execute. Machiavelli understood that real power is not shown in how often you act, but in how rarely and how effectively. One precise blow at the right time is worth more than 100 noisy moves, because it's not about fighting longer. It's about fighting smarter. So let them drain themselves trying to shake you. Let them fire off everything they have. You'll be the one left standing untouched, unbothered, and ready to end it with a whisper they never saw coming. No one stands strong alone. Behind every powerful figure is a hidden structure, alliances, loyalties, advisors, enablers. That's the real armor, and if you strike without dismantling it, first, your blow will fail. Because the strength you see in front of you isn't just in the individual, it's in their network. And the true Machiavellian doesn't attack the man, he attacks the support. Before you strike, isolate. Quietly, subtly, sow doubt in their relationships. Make their allies question their judgment. Create silence in places where they once had applause. One by one, remove the pillars not through direct confrontation, but through whispers, timing, and tension. And when the foundation is gone, the structure collapses under its own weight. Machiavelli understood this perfectly. If you confront a leader surrounded by loyal support, you face resistance. But if you confront a man alone, even the proudest king begins to second guess. Fear creeps in, confidence fades, power becomes fragile. So don't rush into battle. Prepare the battlefield, remove the hands that would reach to lift them, break the echo chamber, let them look around and see no one standing behind them. That's when the strike is clean. That's when it lands with precision, not just wounding the target, but erasing their ability to rise again. Because in this game, the fall doesn't begin with a blow. It begins with isolation. There is a form of isolation more destructive than physical separation. It's psychological isolation. You don't need to remove your enemy from the battlefield. You only need to make them feel alone on the battlefield. Because once doubt infects the mind, it spreads like a virus quietly, invisibly, until it erodes everything they once trusted. You begin small, subtle. A comment here, a delayed reply there, a missing ally, an unexpected silence. Their once solid world begins to feel fragile. Questions arise. Why did he go quiet? Why isn't she answering? Am I losing control? These thoughts don't scream, they whisper. And whispers are far more corrosive. Machiavelli understood this. When a man begins to doubt his allies, his influence, and eventually himself, he no longer moves with certainty. He hesitates. And in the realm of power, hesitation is death. Because when confidence dies, control dies with it. The genius of psychological isolation is that it doesn't break someone, it makes them break themselves. They retreat inward spiral, deeper questioning motives, revisiting conversations, replaying every silence. And in that lonely mental prison, even the strongest begin to collapse. You didn't attack, you didn't threaten. You simply altered the temperature around them just enough for paranoia to take root. And when they no longer trust their environment, their relationships, or their own instincts, you've already won. Mercy is a beautiful concept, but in the realm of power, unfinished destruction is an invitation for revenge. Machiavelli warned of this centuries ago. If you strike your enemy and allow them to walk away with dignity, influence, or support, you have not ended the conflict, you've delayed the war. And next time they'll come back sharper, colder, and determined to destroy you. That's why a true strategist doesn't settle for punishment. He ensures elimination, not always physical, but psychological, social, and symbolic. You don't just defeat your opponent, you erase the idea that they ever posed a threat. You don't leave a door open, you seal the room behind you and burn the map. This isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Because a wounded enemy is more dangerous than a defeated one. Pain breeds obsession, humiliation breeds vengeance, and if you leave your adversary even a sliver of narrative to cling to, they will use it to rebuild. First, their pride, then their alliances, and then their reach. So when it's time to end it with precision. Cut off their voice, their platform, their ability to recover. Silence their name in the rooms where they once held power. Let their fall be so absolute that even their former allies hesitate to speak for them. Because in the Machiavellian game, survival isn't about looking good, it's about making sure they never rise again. There's a moment in every conflict where hesitation becomes a death sentence, not for the body, but for influence, for position, for peace of mind. The Machiavellian understands this. That's why when it's time to strike, he doesn't flinch, doesn't explain, doesn't soften the blow. He ends it, clean, final, irreversible. This isn't cruelty, it's survival. In a world where enemies remember every slight and feed on the smallest mercy, leaving them breathing is not kindness, it's negligence. Because the wounded don't disappear. They return, smarter, angrier, and with nothing left to lose. A half measure is never forgotten. It lingers, it festers, it gives your adversary something even more dangerous than power, a reason. And no strategist allows that. You don't just win, you leave no path back. You don't just silence them, you remove the stage. You don't humiliate, you erase. Machiavelli didn't preach brutality for show, he taught precision for permanence. If a threat exists, end it not with rage, but with strategy. Not with noise, but with a silence so sharp it communicates one truth: there will be no round two. Because in this game, the only confrontation worth having is the last one. Not to prove dominance, not to flex ego, but to guarantee you never have to fight the same battle again. The final stage of power isn't war. It's absence. Not because you've lost, but because you've won so decisively, so surgically, that no one dares to challenge you again. Machiavelli understood this. The highest form of dominance is not needing to dominate at all. When you walk into a room and no one even considers testing you, that is the true endgame. You don't get there by destroying every enemy. You get there by sending a message so sharp, so permanent, that the battlefield goes silent, not from fear, but from recognition. People don't resist you because they're afraid of pain. They resist because they've accepted your positioning. You've made conflict obsolete. That's why the untouchable don't linger. They don't explain. They don't return. They strike once, disappear, and leave behind an atmosphere no one wants to breathe in again. Their presence is remembered not because of noise, but because of the lack of it. A silence so profound it becomes legendary. This isn't about ego, it's about peace, the kind of peace only the victorious get to enjoy. You don't look over your shoulder, you don't reopen old wars, you don't fear retaliation. Why? Because you left nothing behind, no thread, no exit, no second chances. In the Machiavellian world, the greatest power isn't in the strike. It's in never needing to strike again. You don't just win. You end the possibility of opposition altogether. In a world that rewards noise, urgency, and emotional reaction, the most powerful thing you can do is stay silent, stay calm, and stay unreadable. Real strength isn't about proving yourself. It's about knowing you don't have to. When you control your emotions, you control the room. When you delay your response, you control the rhythm. And when you shape how others see you, you shape how they treat you. This mindset isn't about manipulation for cruelty. It's about self-mastery in a chaotic world. Don't fight every battle. Don't explain yourself to those who've already decided who you are. Instead, protect your energy. Watch. Wait. Move only when the outcome is certain. Whether you're navigating office politics, toxic relationships, or personal betrayal, the lesson is, the same power belongs to those who can stay composed while everyone else burns out. You don't need to be feared, you just need to be respected, and that begins with discipline, patience, and the courage to let silence speak for you. Because in the end, the person who doesn't react controls the game.